I'm Michael Young. I'm a professor architecture at the Cooper Union in New York City and partner in the architecture practice of Young and Ayata in Brooklyn. So I'm an architect and an educator. The way I got into architecture is kind of similar to a lot of stories that you've probably heard before. And no, I did not have a parent or a relative in architecture. I was good at math and good in art, and somebody at some moment said, "Hey, you should go do architecture." And it's interesting because there's a little bit of truth in that, but actually, we do not spend our times doing math, nor is it the activity of the architect the same as the ways in which creativity is valued within other artistic practices. But I think at some point, fairly early on, it was something I felt comfortable in, but also something I was interested in. And there was a lot about it that I did not understand at all, and I was interested in that. So it felt like the right fit, and felt like a good thing to spend time doing fairly early on after high school and my undergraduate studies. It's different now than I thought it was just a year ago. It changes constantly, and yeah, absolutely, without a doubt, what I thought architecture was before I went to architecture school was radically different. And I think there's something to this that is important, that it's not something that necessarily you do because you have a set of skills in it. There's things like that we all have that we're all kind of invested in. But I guess for me, the thing is that you're continually interested in it. I'm continually interested in it now after 30 years of being involved in architecture in one way or another. I'm still interested in it. It's still changing. There's still things I want to know about. There's still things that I'm learning. There's still things that I misunderstood or understand in a way now that I did not just in a few years ago. And that makes it an exciting thing to spend time with. Well, I spent the first 30 years of my life in California. I grew up in Southern California. I grew up in Los Angeles and Orange County, and went to school in San Luis Obispo, and then worked in San Francisco. So I feel connected to California very directly and very intimately. And I relate to it as my home, especially Southern California. But I've been in New York now for almost 20 years. And I guess I've been on the East Coast for 20 years, New York for about 15 years. And I love living in New York. And I love living in a city that's in many ways very different as an urban experience than any city on the West Coast. And I find that exciting for architecture, and for me as an architect. And I also find it exciting for an exchange of ideas. And it's not to say that somehow this requires me to renounce certain aspects of my California past. I come back here frequently and love being here. But there is a change that I've noticed in myself in the ways in which I do what I do within architecture by being in a city like New York. And I think that's probably why I haven't left it yet. So at a certain level, I'm also answering your question with the addendum of the ways in which one chooses to embed oneself into a place, even if it is not that which you grew up with, ends up becoming a new kind of origin story, a new way of defining your relationships to the things in which you do regarding the environment. One thing that is just kind of like a direct thing that's different, and even a little bit of a cliche, but sometimes cliches have bits of truth in them, which is what propagates them through time. In New York, you spend as much time out of your apartment in the city in different manners, in an extended domesticity that includes the places where you work, the places where you teach, the places where you eat, the places where you drink, and the commute that you are involved in are all in a kind of public that involves the kinds of informalities and unpredictabilities of happenstance as you meet new people, see new things that change constantly over time. And within California, the amazing thing is the ability to spend as much time as you do within a home or at friends' homes, and those things begin to become important in a way that's not exactly present in New York. And so I guess in a weird sort of way, one manner in which you can draw the line is the line between privacy and publicity, or the public realm and the domestic realm. And those things are not drawn in exactly the same places between the two cities. And it's more than just I have a larger house in Los Angeles, I have a smaller apartment in New York, I have a car in Los Angeles, I don't have a car in New York. Those things affect it. But it's also the attitude of the ways in which one shares and or claims personal space is different between the two cities. Yeah, many mentors. I mean, there was professors who were massively influential to me in my education. Just to name a few, Bilgi Donnell, Terry Hargrave, John Lang and Karen Lang at Cal Poly, Peter Eisman, Jesse Reiser, Miles Ritter at Princeton, Ed Eigen at Princeton. All of these people changed the way in which I thought about architecture and thought about what it was that I did as an architect at different moments and at different times in my life. And you know, mentorship is interesting because it seems to imply a long period of time in which somebody becomes involved with guiding and or leading, but it can also be a very intense and a very short period of time in which trajectories become altered and or you think of and see things in different manners. All of those people were hugely influential to me. And then the colleagues that I've had as a teacher at the Cooper Union and elsewhere have been just instrumental in terms of me learning how to become a teacher. And it's not the same thing. Ultimately, there's the people who have taught me to become a teacher have been as influential as the people who have taught me to be an architect. You can have mentors who are friends in that sort of way. It's a little bit like I don't know if you know the story of Jacques Rancière's ignorant schoolmaster, where the schoolmaster who teaches that which he does not know, because there's a belief that the process of education is not the passage of knowledge in a top-down manner from a master to an apprentice, but a discursive manner that's a question for the ways in which a teacher learns as much from their students as the students do from the teacher. And so there are a number of friends who I've been involved with over time as an architect who I've learned from in a non-academic setting that has been instrumental to the ways in which I've developed as an architect, as an educator, as somebody who writes, as somebody who produces creative work. And if I had to kind of think about who those people are, and the roles in which they've played in my life, it's as important as any teacher I've had. No, without a doubt. And some of them are younger than me. I think this is actually something that's kind of wonderful is when you start realizing that it's not an age-based situation, or even really a knowledge-based situation. It's ways in which relationships with different people alter how you look at it is that we do, or look at the environment at large. And in that, if that's a way to think about mentorship, maybe a much healthier way than a master-apprentice sort of relationship. Practice is involved in discourse, and the discourse is involved in questions of the discipline. And so, without a doubt, the practice of Young and Ayata, myself and Kutan Ayata, is heavily developed through teaching. And then there's things that come from the work in the office, working on buildings or competitions or experimental projects or exhibitions, that then goes back into the studios and seminars and comes out in a radically different format by the work of the students. And then those set up another set of questions for the ways in which we work on the next project in the practice. All of those things are integral to the ways in which we work. Both Kutan and I teach. Our practice has been set up over the last 12 years with and in conjunction with teaching. And we've taught at many different places. And I think that's been kind of incredibly healthy for both of us. I've taught at Princeton, Yale, Columbia, Pratt, and primarily at Cooper, and Kutan's taught at Pratt and Penn in Columbia, and now at UCLA. And because of these kind of these shifting and altering orbits, the student conversations are always different. Our involvement with that kind of question of discourse is always different. The fact that we're constantly writing and then working on projects, all of that is the practice. So, for instance, in the past 2 years, I write almost every day, if not every day, a series of articles, this book that just finished. And at the same time, then there's the conversations that Kutan and I have about not only the writing, but about the projects that we're working on, the competitions we're working on. And then there's the classes that we're setting up that we're teaching. And quite often, the classes that we're setting up as we're teaching will present a question for us that will become a new project, a new experimental project where we're trying to deal with, let's say, images and realism. Right? That becomes a debate that we're having in a seminar. All of a sudden we do a project that's trying to at least address what we feel like at a given moment about that question, or the aesthetics of the background, or a relationship between ornament and decoration. And that can be addressed through building, through imaging, through drawing, through modeling, and in a way pursued also discursively through research and writing. So, yeah, I mean, I guess ultimately we do all of that every day. I wish we were doing more building, but we don't feel that architecture is only completed and/or surmised by the building project. It has to do with all these other forms of mediations that we work on. It's, my experiences, and I can only speak to them, are within the US, Mexico City, and Europe. And there are differences between them. Differences between who's trusted to design a building, differences between what kinds of buildings can be built and the process for going through all of that. And then at a certain level too, where's the trust that a society places, a client places in relationship to the architect? So is it more difficult to build in the US? At a very pragmatic level, yes. But that doesn't mean that there aren't things that happen within the US that are in a way better than other places. Like, for instance, Kutan and I have been able to have the practice that we've had because we both have academic careers that provide us a certain level of stability and access to discussions. That can be very difficult in many other countries if you do not already have an established building career. So at a certain level, is it harder to build buildings in the US? Sure, but doesn't mean that it's harder to have a career in the discourse of architecture, or a career in architecture, let's say. We can get rid of the word discourse too, and just kind of think about what it is if we expand the definitions of architecture to be more than just simply a building. Now, all that being said, again, to repeat myself, I wish we were doing more buildings. And that takes a significant amount of effort. And there are legal questions that make it hard. And there are economic questions that make it hard. But, we're young, gonna keep at it, keep working on it, and hopefully build up to a point where we can find a better balance between the speculative and the actual. Well, I think the housing crises that many cities are going through in the United States should absolutely be a topic of consideration and a topic of discussion both in schools and outside of schools. And this relates to homelessness and all of its issues and questions as well. So I guess I would hope that they're not totally divided situations. I would hope that we'd be able to talk about the ways in which they're actually integral in all levels to what we do as architects. And it's not an either or question. To me, to speak about aesthetics is a very political question. And there's nothing worse than, let's say, something like the aestheticization of a crisis like homelessness. And that's a very slippery slope, because that begins to become, how much more problematically elitist is it to see somebody doing lovely, beautiful rendered drawings of a truly humanitarian crisis. That is not what I'm talking about in terms of bringing together a question of the social and the political with the aesthetic. To me, it is much more one of the ways in which we as architects, in the things that we build, affect everyone's perception of the environment. Who has access to it, who doesn't have access to it, who is it for, who is it not for, who can participate, who cannot participate. Those are political questions, and we as architects put them forward foremost through the aesthetic articulation of our buildings. And that's more than form. It involves material, it involves access, it involves the ways in which one circulates, moves through, behaves within and around the architecture of our cities. So I guess I would hope that we can bridge that gap in some manner and begin to address the severity and the seriousness of the issues that face us, yet not depend on somehow diminishing the qualitative questions of the architecture, or to somehow confuse where and in which ways we as architects have influence and have power. Because we are not policymakers, we are not politicians, nor are we those with the kind of finances or money to drive certain decisions of development within the city. This does not mean that we should not be concerned citizens. We absolutely need to be. But we also need to begin to become very clear about the ways in which we as architects are participant in and affect these problems around our environments. I think that the most difficult things involved with architecture, and there's two, and again, this seems like I'm going to somehow answer in a similar manner, but just the day-to-day activities of what it takes to put together a building in terms of coordination, communication, a flow of the multiple parties that are involved in all aspects of dealing with the built environment is just incredibly difficult. But even more difficult than that is to put forward a piece of architecture that has an argument about how our environment, our world, our reality can be other than we assume it to be. That is probably the most difficult, because of the complexities of building, because of the multiplicities of people, because of the length of time, the amount of money, the assumptions that go into it by all those who are either experts or not experts. We tend to be very conservative. We tend to continue to create the things that we already see or know how to do. And thus we continue to exacerbate social problems. We continue to exacerbate biases and other kinds of forms of exclusion and privilege in our environments. And so the most difficult thing to do is to manage those complexities of the built world and yet still provoke an argument about how the environment can be other than we think it is, other than we think it can be. And in that, hopefully open up possibilities for people to imagine that they can be in the world in a different manner too. And something I think we can aspire to. I can't make any claims to have done so. And that's maybe part of why I view it as so difficult, is that it's, when it happens, I can see it, and I can also see my failures and my own inability to do it, and my own kinds of ways in which I fall back on things I've seen or done or know. And that's a problem for each of us to kind of, I think, continually grapple with as architects. And it's hard. It's an interesting question, and it's one that I think we've probably all had conversations with all of our architecture and non-architecture friends, and the simplest answer is that people who don't do architecture do not have any idea the process that we go through as architects in the design, construction, presentation, and analysis of our built environments. At the same time, architecture is one of the few things out there that every single person has a very strong opinion about, in a way that if somebody who wasn't trained in medicine wouldn't tell a doctor what to do, or wasn't trained in law wouldn't tell a lawyer what to do, even if wasn't trained in art wouldn't tell a painter what to do or what to not to do. But people have very strong opinions about what architecture should be and should not be, even if they have no experience of dealing with it at all. And this actually is a thing that leads us right back to the question of aesthetics, because it has such an impact on people's lives, because everybody will spend every single moment of their entire life in architecture, or next to architecture, or near architecture. It affects our world in ways that law, medicine, and art don't. And in a way that both makes it immensely familiar and incredibly inaccessible once people start to see the kind of questions that are undertaken in the design and production of any piece of architecture. And a term like aesthetics, every single person has some engagement with it, but we don't all share the same definition of it. And I think it's important for all of us to be as clear as we possibly can about the terms that we use. And so, yeah, for each of these things, if we're going to use them, let's be clear about them. If not, it leads to misunderstandings, miscommunications, and potential problems throughout. So yeah, let's be as clear as we possibly can.